Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Episode 103, Justice.
With my customary greeting of joy and happiness, I, Ken Ray, welcome you to this edition of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast.
And with my customary greeting of jogging and doing it, I'm John Champion. Each week on Mission Log, we take apart an episode of Star Trek, searching for the messages, morals, and meanings, and trying to figure out whether the whole thing stands the test of time.
Sometimes they're pleasurable, sometimes they're painful, and sometimes, as the wise philosopher Freddie Mercury implied, pain is surprisingly close to pleasure.
Will such be the case with Justice? Keep us in your ear holes and we'll find out together. Can I also point out that Freddie Mercury also said, gimme, gimme, gimme fried chicken? So,
Hey, don't knock Mr. Fahrenheit, dude.
Believe me, I will not stop him now.
Okay, good. Well, never mind. It's going to be a sad and a bad joke, but we will move on from that. So Justice.
Yes.
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 I so look forward to this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people think I'm kidding.
They might.
Yeah.
This is kind of like when we first started Next Gen, and people who would either talk to us in person at a convention or send us an email or to be like, oh, hey, watch out, because this episode is coming up. And everybody would name the episode that they thought was going to freak us out. And Code of Honor, fairly.
Yeah, they were absolutely right about that.
Yeah, right. But in that long list of episodes, people saying, whoa, it gets kind of rocky from here. I would say that Justice was in that list, and therefore I'm looking even more forward to talking about it.
Yes. Were they right? Should we greet this with such trepidation? We will find out in a bit. But there's another TR thing that we do first, and that is trivia. John?
Right on, Ken. So we'll keep this one a little bit short because I think we got a lot to talk about today. The original treatment for Justice was written by John D.F. Black. Of course, we remember him as being a producer and writer on the original Star Trek. And it was truly an entirely different story. His first treatment, his first script. It involved an Enterprise crewman being killed while protecting kids on the planet. And then you had the rise of a rebel force, and then that rebel force having just as harsh laws as the faction that they overthrew. It bears no resemblance to Justice as we are reviewing it today. And John Black actually went by his nom de plume of Ralph Willis for his credit on this show. Now, some of the location shooting was done at the Donald C. Tillman Water Reclamation Plant in Van Nuys, California. That facility opened in 1985, and it reclaims and treats up to 40 million gallons of wastewater per day for use in the surrounding communities. The site is well known as well for its Japanese garden, and this is the first, though definitely not the last time, we will see this used as a location in Star Trek. So get used to that water reclamation facility. I have to mention a few of the guest stars and appearances here. Brenda Backey. I have to admit, Ken, to you and to the world, I really have a thing for Brenda Backey. I think she was fabulous and beautiful in Hot Shots Part 2. She also played Lana Turner in L.A. Confidential, and let us not forget the 1989 classic Death Spa.
Here's what I will say about her. If back in the day, because I don't know what she looks like now, but she so could have played Bernadette Peters' younger sister.
Oh, sure,
or her daughter in something, and I would have paid money to see that twice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's also part of the wig in this episode.
The what? Never mind then. Crushed, crestfallen, heartbroken. Please continue.
Sorry. Now, there's not a whole lot of other breakout guest stars on this one. There was the youngest Edo girl who befriends Wesley. That is Judith Jones, and she continues to work as an actor in TV film as of our recording today. And it's funny, there was actually one kid on the set who may have had a crush on her. There's this blonde kid playing one of the Edo, wearing the little pink jogging suit, and he's way, way off in the background. You really probably will not be able to see him, but his name is Rod Roddenberry.
Wait, what's his name?
Rod Roddenberry.
Wow. Do you think he and the guy who created the show ever met? Because that's quite the coincidence.
It is kind of amazing, huh?
I found this episode torturous. The whole thing centers on something I've always wanted to do, but never can. Why, oh why, did there have to be so much jogging?
Prologue. Arriving at the Rubicon solar system after dropping off new colonists nearby at the Stranab system, the Enterprise investigates what seems to be a lovely planet, lush greenery, blue skies, friendly locals, very friendly locals, everything you might want on shore leave except for white rabbits and wayward samurai. Data is getting a glitch on his computer, but who cares? It's shore leave time, y'all. Picard even says Wesley can come along for this one. Act 1. On the planet's surface, the first away team finds the locals to be awesome, fit, friendly, and one might say frisky. Deanna says it all checks out. They're just happy and happy-go-lucky. They don't quite know what to make of Wesley since he's a kid and it appears the adults prefer to do, adult things. No worries. Wesley can go off and play with the other kids. For everyone else, the Edo people seem to really have it going on. Their skimpy outfits, very clean rooms, oil massages, people making out everywhere, and jogging, just tons and tons of jogging. Seriously, they jog everywhere. On the Enterprise, things are a lot less sensual, but just as exciting. That computer glitch turned out to not be a glitch at all, and a ship, or something, appears to fade in right in front of the Enterprise. Now, how about that red alert? Act 2. So that thing hanging out in front of the Enterprise? Don't really know. It's sort of there, but sort of not there at the same time. It kind of looks like a ship or a space station, but no one can make anything of it until a glowing orb flies out from the alien vessel and directly into the Enterprise. It's like a basketball, but transparent, glowing, and has sort of a threatening attitude when it asks Picard what they're doing here. It wants to make sure that the people on the planet below won't be harmed and that none of the Enterprise crew will remain there. It also wants to know the purpose of leaving a colony on the other planet they just left. Picard, kindly but directly, explains that some of Earth's people like the challenge of setting up colonies elsewhere. Plus, it helps to propagate the species. The orb is no longer interested in Picard, but seemingly very interested in Data. They have a moment of unspoken bonding, then Data is knocked out by the thing. Down below, Wesley is doing what all the Edo kids do. Jogging, gymnastics, explaining what a ball and a bat are. The other members of the landing party are getting to know more about the Edo as well. It gets a little weird when Riker can't reach the Enterprise, and they realize that Wesley is missing. This leads to a talk about crime and punishment and how there is no crime on their planet, mainly because the only punishment is death for any violation. Now, where was Wesley? Act 3. Oh, yeah, he's playing ball with his new Edo friends. No big deal. Running around playing catch, and then he just happens to stumble into a planted area behind a low fence, and he crushes some new flowers. And that's an executable offense. Seriously? Seriously. The Edo mediators show up, and they're awfully sorry about the whole thing, but the kid did just violate a law, and he'll need to be put to death. So they do, and the episode ends. Okay, not really. Riker, Worf, and Tasha show up, and they stop the mediators from lethally injecting Wesley. They still can't reach the Enterprise, though, and on the Enterprise, Data is still out cold. In an instant, the glowing orb disappears and communications are restored. Something is up, so Picard is beaming down. Act 4, time for a lesson in Ito versus Earth law. They still have the death penalty, and Picard explains that we do not. See, we're so much more advanced. The Ito are suitably put off by the smug inference that they are not as advanced, but Picard is going to respect their laws and customs as best he can. He's bound by the Prime Directive, which means he can't just come in guns blazing and steal Wesley back to safety. While he's at it, Picard asks the Ito if they know about the object that has been hanging out near the Enterprise. Riven, the Ito woman who has had kind of a thing for Riker, knows exactly what it is. That's God. Okay, Picard's got a plan then. He beams himself, Troy, and Riven up to the Enterprise for a closer look. When she sees the vessel, she knows it definitely is God. And God gets a little teed off about this. The vessel starts approaching the Enterprise, and that intimidating voice demands that his child be returned to her planet. Picard absolutely complies by putting his comm badge on her to be beamed down at once. Dr. Crusher, who has so far been trying as hard as she can to get some word from the captain about Wesley's safety, leads Picard to sickbay where Data is again conscious. He explains what's going on. At the moment he was knocked out, the alien beings, that's plural, communicated with him and also shared all of Data's knowledge. The godlike beings are interdimensional, super advanced technologically, and they are protective of the Ito. And they totally know that they are worshipped. That's cool. They're protective of their area, too, the whole system in which the Enterprise has been traveling and dropping off settlers. The aliens, are curious, and they are observing the Enterprise crew to see how this will all play out. Picard is still torn about the Prime Directive, and now he's got Big Brother watching him squirm. Act 5. Picard has a dilemma. He could grab Wesley and leave, or he could stay and let him be executed. And that's clearly not a good outcome, but Picard is trying to understand what this alien observer expects him to do. If they understand the Prime Directive now, how do they reason it, and how do they think he'll act? At best, Picard would have to reason his way out of obeying their laws, while at the same time making a big deal about honoring his own laws. Time to beam down to Rubicon 3. Picard assures the people he is not a god, even though he has a rad spaceship. He's just there to use his godlike powers of negotiation to get Wesley back where he belongs. Picard explains that he is sworn to protect his crew, but he is also bound by a law that tells him he can't interfere. Well, too late for that. But if he does take Wesley away, then the Ito god may punish him and his entire crew anyway. The landing party prepares to beam up, Wesley included, but nothing happens. Seems that the Ito god is blocking the transmission since we're all leaving on a sour note. Let's try this again. Picard looks to the sky, hoping the Ito god will hear him. He firmly states that true justice cannot exist where laws are absolute. That seems to do the trick. The crew are beamed back aboard the Enterprise, and they contact the Ito god ship one last time. Picard concedes that they will remove the Earth colonists if that's what it wants. In a subtle flash, the other ship disappears, leaving Picard with the brief sign he needed. The end.
Did he actually leave him with a sign?
Well, they think it was a sign.
They think it was a sign. See, this is a problem. This is a problem
not.
Talking to God.
Yeah, little too subtle.
Maybe a tiny bit. Maybe a tiny bit. I got to say, you mentioned actors that had been in other things, and the other things that some of the actors had been in. It was really good to see Glinda the Good Witch back in this episode.
Oh yeah.
The bubble, just the bubble. It wasn't actually Glinda. It was sort of like how David Prowse played Darth Vader, but he didn't actually play Darth Vader, but he actually did.
Right.
Yeah, Glinda the Good Witch played the godlike being in this, but she didn't really. It was voiced by somebody else.
Oh, right. Yeah. Right. Quite the booming voice.
Quite the booming voice, indeed.
Hey, wow, Wesley, smart kid. He might be a young guy, but he speaks up right away that his custom is just to do whatever their customs are.
Yeah, I'm not sure that was so smart. I don't know. It depends on what you're looking for, I suppose.
And I know he sees all the very, intimate, gentle hugs going around. He's like, yeah, I do that. Please.
Yeah.
Please,
and yet
do I do that?
And yet he lets himself go off and like play ball.
Right.
Like if you were really smart, forgive me, I'm just going to be that guy because I've been a 15-year-old guy. If you were really smart, what he would have said is, no, I'm just young. I mean, I just look
right.
young.
I just look young.
I'm not young. No, I'm from a different part of their planet. So take me to the best part of yours. I'm going to beat up on Wesley for a second here, just a tiny bit.
Okay. Yeah.
When I go to people's houses, as I often do, and break things, as I often do, I apologize for breaking whatever I broke. I've actually got a little pattern now because I do it so often.
Okay.
If somebody asks me if I'm okay, I'll assess my situation and answer accordingly. But my default position is, sorry, I broke your thing. Whatever that thing happens to be. Not acting Ensign Crusher, though. Because they're like, oh, you stepped on the plants. And he's like, I'm fine.
Right.
But the plants. And he's like, no, really, I said I'm okay. And it's like, okay, is your nickname Plant? Because nobody is asking you whether you're okay. We're all worried that you're going to... Oh, that the half Edo, half Kryptonian guards are going to come and kill you, which they come to do. I will also say really quickly, and this is less about beating up on Wesley, crappy place for teens. This planet. This is like a horrible place for teens. It's like, so the adults all have sex and the kids all act stupid.
You're right.
Right. So I don't understand how to play. How do you say ball? Is that what you say?
Right.
The two options are, ball, as in, play with a ball, or doing it. As in ball, I guess. I don't know. It strikes me as not necessarily the. I don't know. I would expect maybe more of a range of activity. D&D, that might be fun. Video games.
They have limited options.
Yeah, they haven't even evolved to stickball yet. We're seriously just up to ball.
Right.
On this one.
Right.
And the occasional cartway or hand walking.
Well, and then the other kids say to Wesley, like, "Hey, you're really good at this." It's like
ball?
good at ball, good at jogging lightly and
throwing a ball. And what does Wesley say? Oh yeah, we play this all the time back home.
Right.
Yeah, it's because it's true. I will say I have an affinity for playing ball. It used to be I had a friend with whom I used to write years ago, and that like one of our two key tools were a computer and a handball, and we would back and forth to trade ideas. But, it was pretty... I feel like we had evolved a little bit past just the... Oh, no, ball is it. It's the end-all, be-ball.
Oh, hey. But, you do have to wonder how this whole world works. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know that you and I, via mission log, and because it's come up before and we will continue to come up, is like this idea of how do we get toward the perfect society, and do you actually achieve that, and what does that perfection mean? And the Edo seem to have it, at least as far as they're concerned, and you can parallel this to the Apple. Like, they've got everything they need, and they're all fit, and they're all happy, and things are looking good if you're an Edo. But who's doing all the manual labor?
We don't know. Well, we don't know how much God is doing for them.
True. And you have to assume kind of like the Apple, that this God is sort of doing everything.
Yeah, except for the part where we might want to come back to this. I don't know. We don't know whether God set up their whole rule of, okay, so there's a moving target, and that moving target is the protection zone. And if anybody breaks the law in the protection zone, and you never know where it is, then that person gets killed. If they happen to do what they're doing wrong at a time that happens to be covered by the law, otherwise it's just, whatever you can get away with. Or, of course, nobody tries to get away with anything, though, because it's not like, pay $50. It's, no, you're dead. You're dead if that happens. Right. But we don't know if that came from God or if that came from the Edo. We don't know really where that... There's a lot that we don't know about the God thing here. But I would say manual labor, the sense that I got that there wasn't any, because then, there's not nearly enough time to play ball.
Right.
Or whatever other activities they might want to pursue.
Which then kind of, and this might lead into a very different discussion, is sort of, well, what is the point of that God doing all of that, just to have things worship it? It raises a lot of good questions.
It does. I mean, it actually, honestly, what it reminded me of, and this will blow people's minds, BEM. It was very much Bem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they were there to study that, and they thought Kirk, Spock, and whoever. I don't think McCoy was with them, but Bem was certainly there with them. They thought they were all there to study the race that was down on the planet, and it turns out Bem was studying them, studying the race down on the planet. And in the meantime, there was this godlike thing that was, sort of overseeing the whole deal, but we never really got what their point was either. It was just, hey, these are my kids, so take off, take a hike.
Right,
get out of here. I'm protecting them, or doing something. We'll call it protecting for now, because that's really what we're given to understand.
Can we also point out that because I feel like it's worth discussing, if at least just for a moment. Everyone is really gorgeous. All the the men and women, they're absolutely these perfect specimens, beautiful bodies, all stunning to look at, and they're really, really white. And really, really blonde. And I'm not sure that this is an intended message at all, but it is kind of striking. We talked about how part of the problem with Code of Honor was not the story necessarily, but it was the trappings of the story. It was the reliance on this all-black cast, and then you present them in this sort of bizarre view of the colonial view of Africa. And I felt like this just sort of stood out to me, like, wow, they are not just white, they are super white, and they are super blonde, and there is absolutely no variation on this planet
except for the
all.
brown eyes, they were practically Aryan. Which is, yes.
And this sort of is the implied vision of perfection as far as our crew are concerned. It's supposed to get there and go, wow, this place is perfect. Except they're all white. This is kind of strange. Again, I don't think it's like an implied, or I know that this is an explicit or a planned thing here. It's a sort of, in retrospect, you go, oh, wow, is that really the best casting choice? I don't know.
Definitely, I think it's not a casting choice that would be made today.
Nope.
I mean, you can try to go in and say, well, they're growing a race, and so they start with the same stock and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's something you would have to call it on if it were being made today. And honestly, probably something you should call it on in 87 as well. Although I can't remember. Well, yes, of course I do. I was going to say I can't remember when we started seeing interracial relations on television, but there was a show called Star Trek in the 60s that did have a kiss between a white man and a black woman, and certainly there had been plenty of other times since then. Heck, Sammy Davis Jr. kissed Carol O'Connor on All in the Family, and that's way going. Although I don't think it was a serious kiss.
Well, and he kissed Nancy Sinatra, actually predating Star Trek, but that was a sort of a friendly, like, I think there was no context of romance or anything there. But
that's really interesting. I must confess, I totally missed that, and I'll offer justification later for why I missed it, but I'm ashamed that I missed it. You're right. There should have been, No,
it's just interesting that it wouldn't. As we're saying, it wouldn't necessarily be cast that way today.
No, I don't think. I don't think there's any way it would be cast that way today, unless it were going to be a plot point. Otherwise, yes, there would be. You would see a multicultural or at least multi-ethnic Edo. Although, again, science fiction wise, is there any reason to assume that would be there?
Well, I don't know. Honestly, I think this is something that we will come back to in other Star Trek episodes, because, as a listener pointed out to us in a piece of email, we do have these so often in Star Trek where you have a monoculture where you've got, the Klingons are warriors because they are all warriors, and all Klingons are warriors all the time.
Right.
And the Ferengi are the scheming, profit-driven bankers and traders of the future, because that is all they are and that is all they do.
Right.
So we have very little variation when we step out into other cultures, and that then puts all the work on our cast, our crew, to present those varying points of view.
Yeah. It's really, it's interesting, because I know this was sort of a throwaway idea that you were presenting here, but it almost feels like it should be in the next segment, because you're right. All of those races tend to stand in for one of the things that we don't like about ourselves as humanity, or one of the things that the people writing the story for Star Trek are saying, this is something that we as a people living on 20th century Earth, as this was written, this is something that we as a people need to work on, right? And they either start with an idea of perfection or they start with an idea of flaw. And so you're right, presenting the idea of perfection as blonde and white and super fit. I mean, it raises questions. If you watch Star Trek a little too closely, which I know a couple of guys who do.
Hey, let's talk about this perfect vision here, this perfect society. In this vision of the future, in our vision, capital punishment is gone, as says Picard. So yay, good on us for getting rid of that. But he also says that we have learned to detect the seeds of criminal behavior.
You're jumping way ahead, dude. Yeah, we really need to talk about what we're going to talk about someday. Yeah, let's stop right there, please, because we got to come back to this.
All right, we will.
All right. You want to talk about the line that you hate?
Yes. Go ahead. Would you like to do a dramatic reading?
No, that's you.
Okay.
Yeah. So, or what are you making this up, John?
I'm with Starfleet. We don't lie. Thank you.
And I wasn't there, though there are those who say that his nose grew 1 inch longer that day. It's
line.
Yeah, there's no lying. It's a little too earnest, but that's kind of a thing. I do have another question about moving the show along. Mm-hmm. Should they really have let Data just do an open information exchange with an alien race that they know nothing about?
Oh, they didn't have any choice.
Sure, they did.
Well, what? Dismantle him?
No, they absolutely had a choice. When the thing was talking to Picard, and then it turns around and like looks at Data, Data says, "I don't really know that I understand, sir, but it seems to ask if I am, set up for information exchange." And it's just hanging there waiting for an answer. And Picard says, "Data, if there is any way you can find out more information." And then Data says, "Yes, sir." And then the bubble hits him in the head. So, it's actually waiting for consent. Is there shouldn't there have been let's think about this for a second, because you've got what? Oh, yeah, that's right. Almost all of the information that Starfleet has. And he is what? We don't know. Yeah, tell him everything. I'll be right here. That's going to include how to disable the shields on the Enterprise. That's going to include how to, set a warp core breach. That's going to include everything about defenses all throughout the Starfleet and the Federation. It really struck me as maybe something that they wanted to talk over just a tiny bit more before. Well, Wesley's down there, so I guess give him anything he wants.
Well, calculated risk, I think. At that point, their hands are kind of tied. Here's this thing that could destroy them anyway.
Right.
So if the only option is share as much information as we can with them and hope that they see that we are okay and that we do have a certain rule of law and we do have good intentions, then hopefully they're advanced enough to understand that. I really don't think they had any choice.
Well,
they may have had a choice of shutting off Data or making Data not share any information, but that could have just as easily antagonized the godlike thing and it blown them out of the sky.
I almost feel like there is no part of this show that should not be in the discussion section, because everything that seems like it's something that we're just going to throw away actually feels like something that we should discuss. What the godlike thing in the sky is trying to figure out is whether or not we are going to live by the codes that we're supposed to live by, or that we say that we're going to live by. And we don't know that yet. We don't find that out until a bit later. But it already shows that it's not going to come and kick the door down by the fact that it is sitting there waiting for Data's permission to exchange information with it. So at that point, you could try talking to it.
Yeah.
And not Picard necessarily. And certainly the godlike thing wants to get more information from Data because it wants to eliminate that whole, okay, well, he said this, but when he said that, did he really mean this or did he mean that other thing? It's going to be much easier just to get all the information that you want. It's going to be much easier to, find a way to quickly absorb all of that information and to quickly give that information to someone to be absorbed. Again, though, I'm not sure that strategically it was necessarily the best thing because, now you've got another, however much longer we do Next Gen of wondering, I wonder if that guy remembers that, we blank. We've got, it just struck me as maybe a little overshare, I guess, in the parlance of these days.
Well, in the future, if the present is any indication, Ken, maybe in the future, there is maybe more of a blurred line in what is private and what is public. So they might be struggling with that on the Enterprise. Hey, Data uses one of my favorite lines.
Which one?
Now, he says a little bit differently, but any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. He's quoting Arthur C. Clarke.
Well, he's paraphrasing Arthur C. Clarke, as you said.
He is.
Yes.
He is. Yeah. Ironically enough, because, hey, he's a robot. So, kind of cool. Wait,
I don't understand the robot thing. That's Asimov, right?
Oh, wait. Oh, I'm confusing Clarke and Asimov. Yeah,
that's
you're absolutely right.
It happens.
Yeah.
No, it happens.
It happens.
Yeah.
But no, Arthur C. Clarke wrote that line, and he's
yes, he did.
Technology. It's indistinguishable from magic, and yes, Data did paraphrase that.
Yes, because he's a magic man.
Oh, great! I'm going to go down a whole other path here.
Just go on.
I like to think that Picard isn't just beaming down to save Wesley, but also to make sure that if he's going to be executed, then he'll be awake for it and face it like a man. You know?
Oh, that's so awful.
Because Crusher could come down and say, well, I'm going to give him a sedative, and he won't notice, and he won't know. Picard, no.
That's terrible.
Yeah. And by the way, if we've learned at any point, here again, Picard missed the opportunity when Riven says, you must be gods. And Picard says, no. Ken, if someone asks if you're a god,
you say yes.
Someone should seriously do a new soundtrack for this episode. All alto sax and keyboards all the time. You know what I'm talking about. Don't even pretend you don't.
So I have a suggestion for this next part of the show.
Okay.
Let's talk about sex, baby. This is a borderline porntastic. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like, forgive me, and I'm just going to go ahead and admit stuff, whatever, because I'm a 40-something-year-old guy at this point, and yeah, I was a younger person in the 80s. The first 3 minutes of this episode are like the first 3 minutes of almost any late 80s porn.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, it totally is. It really is.
Scantily clad people running around. Somebody comes, shows up in full uniform. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there will be no clothes relatively soon. It's kind of it's like an overly. I can't remember if you used the term porntastic or if somebody else did, but it really does. I mean, it reeks of late 80s porn.
Yeah,
at least the look of it. At the same time, though, Bill Tice, I mean, shining through. I actually stopped to make sure that he was the costume designer because shades of Andrea in everything that Ito were wearing. Mm-hmm.
Well, so that is the look of the show, and the setup is it throws you off, I think, because this is not Star Trek that we have seen before.
Yeah, well, we've seen plenty of scantily clad women in Star Trek before.
Well, we have, but the context here is very different.
Yes, it is.
This is one of the first times that we're talking frankly about sexuality here and acknowledging the sexuality of the characters in the show, other than just Kirk sort of being this, swaggering macho guy.
Right.
This is something that we know that Gene Roddenberry wanted to address among all other earthly experiences in Star Trek. If Gene Roddenberry is doing a show that tries to explore all aspects of humanity, then sexuality is one of those aspects of being a human being. And it's stuff that maybe you could only hint at in the original series. Mm-hmm. And you could only, come right up to that line and not really cross it. And we got a little more of a hint of that in the motion picture with Ilea. This was a character who was intended, had she been on Phase 2, to be from a culture where, again, we talk about the monoculture and that kind of defining the alien races here. But their sexuality is a defining thing about her race, her species.
The Deltans.
The Deltans, yes.
Yeah.
But here in this show, in this episode, we have a culture in which their sexuality is discussed right at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And so it throws you. It does. And I don't blame our audience for being thrown by that either, And it's not just the sexuality of the Ito that's on display here that makes it a little weird. We see a bit more of the progressive attitude in the Enterprise crew as well. from the moment they beam down, Riker is checking them out. And so is Troy. And she's a little maybe not nervous, but a little weirded out by it. But she's already made a friendship, you know?
Yeah.
And it's all presented as being all right.
Yes.
And we even get those lines like when in Rome, and Riker is just all smiling, happy Riker. And he even asks Worf, but what about just plain old basic sex? You know, so as if this is just a perfectly normal option for him, and especially a perfectly normal option on this planet. And I kept thinking, wow, this is like Logan's Run, just all over again. Yeah, except without people dying at 30. I hope.
Well, you hope. Although, again, we don't know about this God thing up there. I will say that there was one thing that I thought of in defense of this episode's focus on sensuality, and I hate to even say in defense of it. But I know that it's part of probably what throws people off about this episode, as you say. The show was broadcast in 1987, right?
Yep.
Okay, so we're 6 years at this point into the AIDS epidemic, when sex has actually become a fairly scary thing, and not like so scary that nobody's doing it anymore, but it's scary enough that you're not going to have things like Studio 54 going on at this point. You're not going to have things like the bathhouses in San Francisco, as you would have had leading into the AIDS epidemic. Sex has gotten a little bit scary, so it must have actually been kind of fun to leave that by the wayside when writing about the future. And there is a history of, I would say, lascivious characters and societies throughout science fiction. Like some of Heinlein's stuff reads as both incredibly sexist and incredibly dated. Yeah, because of the inclusion of things like free love and the way some of his characters, interact. Right. But it still might have been refreshing to see, some people who don't have to worry or who no longer have to worry about doing it. Yeah. Well, and like I said, that applies to the Edo, but it also applies to the Enterprise crew. I mean, I think that's what's so, you go back to a TOS episode like Shore Leave. Yeah. Okay. And here's the beginning of McCoy as this sort of ersatz ladies' man. Yeah. He figures out what's going on, and I'm like, I'm not just going to have one showgirl. I've got two showgirls. I can make this whatever I want. So so guess what I want. Yeah. Yeah. You get a hint of that, but now it's even more so normalized for this crew. Right, which is a really neat idea. I mean, don't misunderstand. I'm not making fun of the Heinlein thing. I don't like some of the wording that Heinlein uses sometimes, but I actually am about to get in a lot of trouble. Don't know that I necessarily see a problem with the kind of society that he envisions. I'll put it that way. There are lots of, and we talked at the very first episode of this show that we ever recorded, not the first one that we played, but the very first episode of this show that we ever recorded was Amok Time. We talked about the fact, or at least I put forth the fact, that one of the biggest problems in the episode was the fact that we don't talk about sex. That we sort of repress a lot of our, not only a lot of our desires, but actually just even talking about it. We don't talk about it. And by the way, I'm going to head off an email right now because there is one guy, and I know him. There is one guy right now who is writing an email upset that I said doing it. And I need him to know that was actually supposed to be the start of a joke where I was going to do like 5 different names for having sex. Right. Okay. Okay. So I want him to just stop with the clacking of the keys right now because I'll talk about having sex. I'll talk about making love. I was saying doing it because it was going to be followed by all kinds of euphemisms. But, okay. Yeah. Good. That joke's over now. So I'll try to work them all in later. Okay. Good. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, suffice to say that this is not the depiction that you would have gotten on Star Trek in the 60s, but this is also not the depiction that you would get of sexuality in Star Trek now being early 21st century. It's this odd little... Oh, I don't know that I agree. Really? Well, it depends on who's writing it, and it depends on what you're trying to do. This goes back to the debate that you and I were having about Star Trek 6. If you are starting from a place of, I want a show where I think society can go, where society could go, and then we're going to work through the problems that we have today in the form of some other society, then it's quite possible that you would have this. It depends on the starting point for the writer. Now, if you're assuming that we're going to make the Federation of the 24th or 25th century just sort of an analog of our society, which is not what the first season of Star Trek, The Next Generation, was doing.
Sure.
If you're going to make it an analog to our society, then you're right. It would be a very different telling of sexuality. But if you're going to have somebody who's going to say, all right, so what does the Bible say? The Star Trek Bible, that is. What does the Bible say? The Bible says society is awesome at this point. Then really they're going to bring their ideas of sexuality and how you will present it to the table. I think it depends on which Star Trek you're writing, honestly, or from which angle you're writing the Star Trek that you're writing, whether this would be how sex would be presented or not.
Okay. I'll concede that. Interesting idea. Let's move on a little bit from the sexuality to talk about the other big issue here in this episode. That would be the Prime Directive.
Yes.
So we discover kind of this new planet, and we just start beaming people down without knowing anything about them. Then we break their rules, and then we worry if we're going to break the Prime Directive that we already broke.
Yeah. The Prime Directive forbids the Federation and Starfleet from affecting the development of society. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. But, showing yourself to them is no problem at all. And letting them know that, we get a starship, we can fly around your planet, and, we could probably blow this place up if we wanted to, and I'm just going to beam over here now just to prove that I can. But I'm not affecting your society at all at this point. We're just chatting.
Right. Exactly.
It was kind of surprising because one assumes that they didn't even make radio contact.
Yeah,
because one assumes they don't have radios.
They just showed up.
They were just beaming on down. Oh, there's lots of
thin air.
Lots of life forms down there. Oh, well, should we take a closer look and disguise ourselves, a la Return of the Archons? Should
right.
we maybe beam to a part where there aren't many people around, a la Private Little War? No, let's just go say hey. We're tired. We just planted a colony. I'm so tired.
Right. So then we get ourselves into a Prime Directive conundrum here.
Okay.
And you've got a couple of things to weigh out once Wesley is accused of committing a crime and admits to committing a crime, and then we realize that the punishment is death. And I thought the struggle here was played out really nicely because part of what you have going on here is asking if the emotional bond of family, whether it's the family of just Dr. Crusher and her son or the family of the crew, outweighs the logic and obviously the good intention of the Prime Directive as being a non-interference clause here. And meanwhile, the Edo gods are judging how we behave in this crisis. And I had to wonder, would they not also judge how a mother reacts to the threat toward her son, or how the commanding officer in this case reacts to the threat of one of his crew? Picard even says to Data, look, the Prime Directive was never intended for the situation that we're in right now. You and I both wrote down this line where Data asks, would you choose one life over 1,000?
Right.
And Picard replies, I refuse to let arithmetic decide questions like that. So Picard is conceding here that this might be exactly the right time to violate the Prime Directive. He is fully prepared to do that. He tells Crusher, whatever the cost, I will not allow them to execute your son. Funny how we played up to that moment, because Crusher keeps trying to get his attention.
Right.
Wait, my son? No, not now.
Yep.
You keep thinking the first time you see this, is he going to address this? I hope, because we're talking about her son.
Yes. There were two things that reminded me of Spock in this. Mm-hmm. I mean, do the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few? Apparently not when it's Wesley. I mean, it would be. I would be curious to know if it's a red shirt, if it were a red shirt down there. Yeah. And I'm not saying this specifically about Wesley. Maybe it's if it's a child, or what if it's just a child that Picard knows and not somebody else. I mean, it would certainly be a morale killer if after this episode they're walking around below decks going, wow, so did you hear about the captain? Yeah, they caught one of us and he just let him kill him because he wanted peace. Okay, well, that's kind of bad. At the same time, there's a fantastic, and I'm way jumping the timeline, but it was absolutely a fantastic moment in Star Trek Into Darkness when they're trying to decide whether or not they are going to stop the volcano and save, spoiler alert, whether or not they're going to stop the volcano and save Kirk. And Kirk says, on the bridge of the Enterprise, standing there with McCoy, if Spock were here, what would he do? And McCoy says, he'd let you die.
Yeah.
And the thing is, he would, but he's a Vulcan. And he's also a Vulcan who's not terribly familiar with Kirk at that point, and that's a whole other thing about that particular telling. But,
right.
I mean, it's a really, so yeah, not only violating the Prime Directive, but even going against logic at that point. Yeah. Because he's going against logic. Everybody on the Enterprise could die. And yet, what kind of captain would he be if he let one of his crew people die? He runs as much risk, I think, of losing the Enterprise if he lets somebody kill one of their guys as he does saving the guy and then, trying to fight God. Yeah. Or something godlike.
Well, Picard says, my law compels me to protect my crew. That is first and foremost. But the other law says that he cannot interfere with another culture. So he's bound by the two things that should, in that case, have equal weight, unless we're just saying that the Prime Directive is prime because it's more important. But yeah, like you said.
Well, it is called the Prime Directive.
It is. But talk about a morale killer. If you just go around letting people die because, it couldn't get out of that one.
Maybe we should, one less counselor, one more lawyer. So we can actually argue this, and look for the clause, look for the loophole, see what you can find. Right.
There was something that this episode made me think about rule of law and extradition in particular. Do you remember years ago the kid who was traveling in Singapore? He was a U.S. citizen, and he got arrested for chewing gum.
Yes.
And he was caned. Yes. A very harsh punishment, something that we absolutely could not comprehend doing here. And but then, we have a very different attitude when someone from another country commits a crime on our soil. And it made me kind of question how the future of compromise works. Here in Star Trek, we have this vision of a united Earth where there is a respect and a cooperation amongst different cultures. And I ask myself, if we reach a point globally where we can agree on what crimes are okay, as long as they're committed in other countries, would it be okay at some point in the future if a woman from a Western country drove a car in a conservative country in the Middle East where women are not allowed to do that? Would it be okay at some point for an American kid to chew gum in Singapore because we decide globally that some laws only make sense contextually? And that's the interesting argument here in this episode, is saying that the laws are no good if you don't understand their context, if you just let the absolute rule of law be absolute and nothing else. It made me think of the Steve Martin joke about proposing the death penalty for parking violations. No one would break the law because why risk death? And if you do, well, too bad. But there's no room in the Edo Code for accidentally breaking the law. If you or I were speeding in our cars, we might be doing so accidentally. Mm-hmm. And even though it doesn't allow us to just get off scot-free from paying a fine or whatever the level of that punishment might be, but we have degrees of crime and punishment. We have degrees of murder by which one punishment may be more severe than another based on the intent, based on the context. So there's my monologue of what kind of thoughts that sort of put into my head.
Yeah. Well, no, it's I don't really have much to add to that. It's all very interesting. I mean, I guess the Steve Martin joke is kind of a funny joke, but it's also, I guess, kind of true. Mm-hmm. It's a bad idea. Don't misunderstand. I like the version of the 24th century they're talking about where there is no death penalty at that point.
Yeah.
And, send your letters. That's fine. That's just where I happen to stand. And I don't always know, honestly, how I feel about it, because there are some things that are so heinous and grievous that I, being still just a couple of steps from caveman, do occasionally think, oh, but that one. Oh, but that thing. So, ideally, I would like to think that that we get past that. I don't know though. It's such a ugly, hairy thing. No, it really is. I mean, I don't mean to boil it down to that, but I mean, it seriously is. It just makes me. I mean, the whole that we still argue about it makes me ill. This is actually a conversation probably for offline at some point, or if somebody wants to corner me at a convention, then I'll gladly talk about it too. But it's probably not for here because it just goes into other things. I have a question about how we dealt with the God things in this episode.
Sure.
Did we back off of the God things in this episode because what we did was wrong, or because we fear them? And when I say back off them, I mean, well, I used BEM earlier. We were fine leaving those aliens in BEM under the care or tutelage of the godlike creature because we were under the impression that the godlike creature had put them there. Data is willing to say that it's possible that these things that are watching over these creatures put them there. He's willing to say that maybe they're growing them. But he doesn't say it categorically. He can't seem to say it categorically. Kirk, as you mentioned the apple earlier, young James T. Kirk probably would have done something to try to free these people, quote, free these people, quote, free these people who apparently don't have to work, who go around getting laid all the time just because it's fun, and why wouldn't you? Or playing ball. I mean, it depends on their age level, of course.
Right.
He probably would have done something to try to free them.
He would have figured out a way to have blown that ship out of the sky.
Yes, or into whatever other dimension, just solely the other dimensions that it's in and not this one. Because they don't seem to be an evolving society. They don't seem to be an evolving race. They don't seem to be making or producing or struggling or anything. So I'm trying to figure out, like, what is our stance with this particular godlike entity? Are we afraid of it? Are we fine letting it, grow these people? And also the part where Data says, so in talking to the alien things, it turns out they think they own this part of the galaxy. And at the end of that, we're like, oh, okay, well, we'll get out of this part of the galaxy then. Okay, we'll try that with the Klingons. Try that with the Ferengi. We ended up with a neutral zone with the Klingons, right? Because it was war. It was that or war. Did the Klingons try just saying, no, this is our part of the galaxy? Because apparently what the Federation does at that point is like, oh, my bad, I'm sorry. We thought it was open space. Guess not. We'll pick up our things and leave.
Well, let's take that BEM analogy one more time here, because in that episode, you had the godlike thing saying, these are my children, I am protecting them. And if we look at the Edo god / gods as being this really, benevolent, protective force with a childlike race, as we described them in the episode, the experiment may be, maybe the Enterprise crew showing up is exactly what they needed, because the experiment may be that they evolve to a point intellectually, politically, socially, where they aren't relying on simple black and white measures of understanding concepts like justice, like rule of law. That may be exactly the catalyst that they needed for this. Now, the godlike creatures may not have appreciated that it was us and that we're encroaching and we're violating our own prime directive by being there. But Data points out that the Edo god creatures are reasonable and they are rational and they were like us. So there is some common ground for understanding there. Picard just wonders how much they will be able to reason like we do. So, if we look at this just as the experiment that the Edo god is presenting to these people and being protective at the same time, like that godlike creature in BEM saying, these are mine, everything's fine, back off. And unlike James Kirk, who would have blown it out of the sky, Picard's like, cool, we will back off because we have that mutual respect and understanding. But today is a new day for the Edo. because the Edo at least can start to understand the subtlety in the difference of breaking a big law and breaking a small law. And hopefully the death penalty not being the sole answer to everything that crops up.
That's interesting. That's an interesting point. I guess the only thing I would argue is Kirk wouldn't do that, because in Bem, Kirk didn't do that. It almost seems to be a difference of, well, I mean, you could certainly just say it's a difference of the writers and their opinions. But if you want to try to make the whole thing work with those two seemingly opposed Kirk beings, maybe it's a difference of how the people got there. I mean, we decided that the feeders of Vol at one point, built Vol so they wouldn't have to worry, and ended up where they were. Whereas in Bem, we got the impression that the godlike creature, was actually growing the race of lizard people into something better. I actually had to go back and look at stills from that, because I couldn't remember what kind of people they were. But they were lizard people, in case you're wondering. So,
right.
So there's that. There was another question that I had about why we colonize.
Yeah. Well, I thought that was so interesting. Picard describing to the Edo god how and why we colonize other worlds.
Well, let's say what he said. Life on our world is driven to protect itself by seeding itself as widely as possible.
Okay, so
that's our stated reason for colonizing.
Yeah, a biological imperative to protect the species and propagate it throughout the galaxy.
I got to say, at some point, really can't be your reason anymore. I mean, when you got so many planets that you're on, when you got so many planets that you can have a failed colony, and it's not even the biggest news in the world, right? The only way we know about it is because Tasha Yar's there. When colonies have gone so bad that you can just be like, well, that one didn't go so well, but thank goodness we got all these other ones. I think you kind of got to let go of the whole biological imperative thing, right?
Right.
So there are other reasons.
Yes. And the other reason seems to be that people are unhappy, that Picard is indicating that there are people who want a challenge to create a new kind of life for themselves elsewhere.
Yeah.
And this is fascinating because, remember, we're talking about the perfect Earth or more perfect Earth of the 24th century, where we've eliminated hunger, we've eliminated war, we have fantastic technologies, we have starships, we can go anywhere that we want in the galaxy. And yet there are people who would rather fight and struggle and, grow crops on another planet.
Yes. Wow. So like the Earth of the 24th century is practically this side of paradise.
Yeah.
Omicron Ceti 3, is that right? Yeah. So the Earth of the 24th century is practically Omicron Ceti 3.
Without the spores.
And there are people making the case that Jim Kirk made of thinking, I just don't struggle enough. Mm-hmm. Things aren't tough enough for me. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go someplace where I have no food replicators and have to grow invasive plants.
Well, we're back to an argument then about, the nature of happiness. And the thing is that I think the problem we run into is that is a different answer for every single individual to whom you pose that question. Mm-hmm. There are people who, living in 21st century America, where arguably we have an abundance of resources and we have more opportunities than some other parts of the world, but they would rather be off the grid and roughing it somewhere in the mountains, growing their own food and living in a filthy shack, because for them, they want a different kind of experience than what the city or the suburbs offers.
No judgment from you. A filthy shack? How about just a rustic shack? Would that be
okay? Rustic. All right. Okay.
I know you can't get a perfect martini up in the mountains, dude, but come on. Let's be a little less judgmental. Is that really? That's it? Really? Because I thought it might be the filth.
Well, that too.
I don't know. I don't
like filth in my martini.
I don't blame you. I like a dirty martini myself, but that's a little bit different.
It is. But yeah, every individual, and then maybe smaller collectives of individuals. We have people here who have started communes of various sorts because they want a different kind of life than what they perceive they will experience by living, let's say, conventionally. You know? And this apparently now is something that has not changed in the 24th century as well. And not only can you not easily do it, you can't easily do it on Earth. You got to go elsewhere. You got to go clear across to another solar system to get this kind of life that you want. So you have this double-edged sword here. The problem is you have to ask the question of why. Why does that happen at all? What is the unrest that is making people do that? But then why are we not able to address that as an advanced culture?
Well, I mean, we are still sort of colonial a bit, right? I mean, you can say it's propagation of the species, or you can say that it's just making sure that the Federation has a big enough footprint so that if something comes along like the Klingons or like the Ferengi, that we have staked our claim.
Yep.
I mean, we may not actually. It's the whole thing that we've talked about before of. Well, I mean, it's self-actualization in a way, I guess. If you want to be a pioneer on this planet, you're right. You can go live off the grid as best you can here, but you're going to be doing it in some, bit of protected land. You're not going to be able to do that in some place that where nobody's laws can reach you. Now, granted, if the Federation is helping you or the Starfleet is helping you set up a colony, then you're still not beyond the reach of law at that point. But you are a bit more on your own than you ever would have been before.
Yeah.
I'll tell you honestly what I would like to see, and maybe we should call our friend Larry Nemechek. Has anybody ever written, so you want to start a colony? Has anybody ever written the sort of the information packet that you get as a member of 24th Century Earth, thinking about the exciting and rewarding possibilities of moving to Omicron Ceti 4? Saying, there's too much radiation there, plus there are no spores to protect you, so maybe some other planet. Ceti Alpha 7, perhaps. That might be a good place to
beautiful
go.
This time of year.
Any number of places that you could set up a colony. I would love to see the ancillary material for that. And if anybody listening does research and finds out that there isn't any, you just found your way into the Star Trek universe, my friend. So Lord knows I don't have the time to do it. I will say we do get another heaping helping of 20th century barbarism versus 24th century enlightenment. Last week it was we used to kill animals for food, but we don't do that today in the 24th century. This week we used to kill people as punishment or as a crime deterrent, but we don't think that that's right or necessary anymore. And certainly, I mean, there are lots of people who are amazed that we still have the death penalty today. And I think people do assume that one day, well, some people, maybe 50% of the population assumes that one day we're going to get past killing people as punishment. And then, there's another part of the population that doesn't necessarily think that. What this actually, though, really got me thinking about, and this is where I stopped you earlier. Picard says, okay, so we used to kill people, but now we don't. And the Edo says, yeah, but, when you didn't you think it made sense? And Picard says, well, yeah, but we've learned to detect the seeds of criminal behavior.
Yeah.
All right, stop right there.
Okay.
Follow-up question. So what do you do when you detect those seeds? I mean, we know that they're not killing those people because they no longer have the death penalty. I mean, are they locking them up? Are they scrambling their brains? Say,
have you met my friend Dr. Tristan Adams?
I was going to say, do they have like a 10-list device Mark 8, or do they just have like some of the meanest of the mean Vulcans come in and scramble people's brains? I mean, what's happening here?
Something about that really worried me. I thought it was kind of an indication of something very dark. But maybe that's just my imagination.
No,
right?
What I have here in my notes, actually, I love the near utopian future that Next Gen presents, but that throwaway line has the potential for something truly menacing. Truly menacing at the core of this future. Because it's like, so now we figure out who's undesirable. Oh, okay. Well, no, I shouldn't say we figure out who's undesirable. We figure out undesirable traits about those people.
Yeah.
And then what do you do, Captain?
And change them.
Well, you see, he didn't say that.
No.
We don't know. I mean, these could be the colonies. Say, Salusa Secunda is not going to... There's the Dune reference for this week, by the way. It's not going to populate itself. Salusa Secundus, excuse me. Anyway, it did strike me as fairly menacing, and I do kind of wish they had pressed Picard on that, but I think at that point he would have just said, "What's that behind you?" And then, 6 to beam out.
Besides Commander Riker's permanent grin, and Acting Ensign Crusher's newfound respect for gardens, what can we take away from the episode, Justice?
So I approached this episode the way I approached Spock's brain, with a tremendous amount of trepidation. I wouldn't say that I was afraid to do this episode, because I'm much less afraid of sort of like taking the wind out of a first season Next Gen episode than I was taking any wind out of any episode of the original series, except of course for Cat's Paw. What I'm trying to figure out now, though, having watched this a few times for this show, and after the conversation that we just had, why do we hate Justice, the episode Justice? And I want to stop before you even get to answer and say, you and I don't hate Justice.
No.
But this episode lives in everybody's minds as Drek. People remember this as a bad episode. They don't even remember Code of Honor, but they remember Justice as a bad episode.
Right.
And I'm trying to figure out why, because this is actually, I said when we were doing the part that's normally just for throwaway comments, it doesn't feel like there's a throwaway comment to be made about this, except for the fact that the kids play ball and that's all they do. That's like the worst part of this episode. Everything else about this episode is just incredibly rich and incredibly full, and it will be mentioned as one of the episodes that people can't stand.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out why.
From a production point of view, I think there might be people who immediately get turned off by the look of it. It's a very dated looking episode, and it was probably dated looking at the time. And it's a little silly that you have people in these cut out pink jogging outfits jogging everywhere, and there's a lot of blonde hair and a lot of skin. And as I mentioned before, Star Trek is a show that, and let's remove just the production kind of maybe shortcomings for a moment. But Star Trek is a show that up until now has gotten very close to the line of addressing things that have to do with sexuality, and then it doesn't because it really can't. There are a lot of things that are inferred, but you can't really go beyond that.
I have green memories.
Well, remember, the only thing that we ever saw of Kirk that indicated that he had actually done anything was him putting his boots on.
Yes.
After an encounter with Deela.
And also him telling that woman who was hitting on him, we could make some green memories, which is a euphemism for we could, have sex. And Kirk says, I have green mememories. I mean, they never say anything about sex.
Right.
Because they can't, as you pointed out, because it's 66 through 68, 66 through 69. Yeah. So
for the first time now, 20 years later, we get something that's really in your face. And it looks and
use
feels...
a different term. Please use a different term.
But we get something that looks and feels very different from classic Star Trek.
Yeah, that's true.
And we're also, I think, trying to find the footing of this cast and crew that makes Star Trek. There's some unfortunate stuff in here. Wesley having that line about,
I'm from Starfleet,
we don't lie. Yeah. That's just, it's a nonsense, terrible line that is filled with bad logic. And I wish that line didn't exist. But that's one line out of a show that then handles so much else. This episode is so rich and so dense with topics for discussion that are so purely Star Trek that I'm really, other than the look, the style, and the maybe uncomfortable look at sexuality, those are the only things that I can really kind of put my finger on to say this is maybe why this episode is reviled the way it is.
I don't think there's an uncomfortable look at sexuality here, though. I think people are uncomfortable with sexuality, especially here in the States.
Well, that's what I meant. I didn't mean that the episode is uncomfortable. The episode is very forthright. It's very forthcoming about looking at human sexuality through the eyes of this experience with the Edo culture.
Yeah.
Our crew is totally fine with it.
Yes. So, I mean, but that feels like an important distinction. It's not an uncomfortable look. An uncomfortable look is like, on a very special episode of Family or something like that. As opposed to this is just like, first officer's log. I mean, that's pretty much, they are not uncomfortable at all about it. Honestly, the one who seemed most uncomfortable about it was Deanna. And maybe just because she had not been down to the planet before. I mean, who knows how uncomfortable they were, Riker and Yar were when they first beamed down.
Geordi, not uncomfortable at all.
I was going to say, Geordi comes back all smiles. Geordi is so happy about having been on that first, that pre-away team down to the planet. So there seemed to be very little discomfort among the people telling the story. But you're right, people who are watching it may have been uncomfortable either because of the fact that Star Trek has never done it before, or just, that's who we tend to be in the States. That's who a lot of us tend to be in the States anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, do you think that's it? Do you think that's the, if not the only, at least the primary reason that this show gets so much derision?
Well, I mean, I used the term porntastic earlier, and it certainly is. I mean, it does, as you pointed out, have a very dated, and I wish we could be better, honestly, you and I wish we could be better about sort of pulling the story out from the production side, because I think there are episodes that one or both of us have said in the past doesn't hold up because the production kind of gets in the way. And I would like to not do that quite as much.
Right.
The story, the parts with Wesley are really bad. That's the other thing. I mean, what's going to stick out in your mind is the jogging porn stars and the over earnest delivery of certain lines by Will Wheaton.
Right.
And maybe that's why it survives. But yeah, if you go back and watch it, I mean, maybe that's why the derision of the episode survives or is so prevalent. But if you go back and watch this episode, like for the Star Trek parts, they're all over it.
So you and I already have addressed, why other people probably don't like this episode, and then we ask each other if the episode holds up. Well, you and I are both saying that we both really like this episode for a number of reasons. Anything else you want to add to that about the episode holding up?
It gives you so much to play with. It gives you so much to explore. It is again, wow. Have we actually talked about the Prime Directive in these first 6 or 7 episodes now more than they did in the first 2 seasons of Star Trek, the original series? I mean, this is a real examination of who we are. And even if they don't come up with the same answer every time, they are examining who we are and who we want to be and how we're doing along that road. I mean, we would like to think today that we are... I can't imagine that there's a country out there that's fine going, we don't even want to be the best. We're just, we're okay just being okay. Okay, maybe there are countries out there that are that way. We have this idea in the States, and I'm not saying it's not true necessarily or whatever, and don't, get angry. We have this idea that we're the best country on earth. And whether we are or not, to examine that is an important thing. I mean, you have to be willing to look at yourself and decide whether those things, the things that you believe about yourself, you have to be willing to look at it and decide whether those things are actually true. Or you should anyway. Otherwise, you're just going to end up believing something that's not necessarily the case. That's one of the things that's so fascinating about Star Trek to this point. They are constantly checking themselves before they are wrecking themselves. There's no way you couldn't, right? No, I mean they're constantly checking their work. They're constantly checking their steps. They're constantly checking their motivations, which is fascinating. Not to the point of paralysis, though. I mean, they're still out there. They're still doing it. They're still exploring. They're still, somebody gets in trouble, they're going to try to help them. But always with an eye on, okay, well, what does this mean? What does this action mean? If I take this action, what is the equal and opposite reaction that might be the result? It's turning out to be, it's honestly going to commendable a lot sooner than I expected.
Yeah.
Next Gen is already showing up with some amazing storylines that could go up against maybe not the absolute best that the original series has to offer, but I would put some of the stories that we've already hit among at least some of the morals or some of the ideas, the things that we are here to talk about, would go up against a lot of the original series episodes already.
I like what you said about this show and this episode in particular, kind of nailing that about examining humanity and examining life. The unexamined life is not worth living. Well, this is a series and this is an episode full of examination of what we're doing and why we are doing it. So I really applaud the people who made this particular episode for going out of their way to depict a couple of things in the course of a 48-minute TV show and for a wide audience. they depicted a sexually progressive, or at least a more sexually progressive culture than we would usually get on TV, something that sparks a conversation. And these ideas that challenge the whole concept of interference and rule of or respect for law. These are big, heavy topics, and we got to do it in an entertaining fashion. We talked about the things that are dated. Yeah, there are production aspects that are dated.
You know what people could do, actually?
What's that?
Like you suggested with Code of Honor, close your eyes.
Yeah. Well, but here's the thing. But you've got Wesley, and part of the problem is that if you hate Wesley, you're just going to hate Wesley, and there's nothing that you can do about that. And if you're listening to it, you're going to still hear that awful line.
That's true.
You know?
Yeah, but that's not his fault, nor is that Will Wheaton's fault. That's just a bad line.
Yeah, and I also feel like that if you do just totally shut out the visual, then you also lose a little bit of that. I think there's something positive to the almost shock value of just seeing all this flesh on screen. This is a marked difference between the tightly buttoned up, uniformed crew of the Enterprise, and suddenly they're in this other place where it's like, oh, look, it's like the Apple. These people are half naked all the time.
Yeah.
You know? So there's a point to that visual being the way it is, even if we can look at it in retrospect and go, it's a little dated. We wouldn't do that necessarily now.
Yeah.
You know? So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. I like the location shooting. I'm glad that we got out of the ship in a cool looking location. But to me, this is a fantastic episode. It's full of ideas. And I think we've run a little longer than our usual recording, and we could probably keep going on this one. And if the audience has a little trouble getting past the skimpy costumes and blonde hair and miles of flesh and Wesley, that's too bad. For me as a science fiction fan, I kept thinking about other stories that touched on this, not just Star Trek. We talked about the Apple, and we talked about BEM. I mentioned Logan's Run because it's another thing about a dystopia that has this element of looking at human sexuality and looking at rule of law. And I thought about the Time Machine, the Ito being very much like the Eloi in that. So yeah, if you're a fan of Star Trek and if you're a fan of science fiction, I really feel like this needs a second look, but it needs a thoughtful look if you can get past just the visuals.
Yeah. I mean, asking the question of does this episode hold up, I would say story-wise, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, resoundingly.
Production-wise, yeah. I mean, as you say, the looks might be a little different this time. I mean, you would certainly have a more multi-ethnic Edo population, and you also, wouldn't have, somebody look like they just come off the set of the video for Let's Get Physical.
Right.
But I mean, that's that and the unfortunate Crusher line, or Wesley Crusher line, excuse me, are about the only ways that you can fault it. I think. I mean, I think it absolutely holds up.
How about messages? Because I feel like there's.
I don't think there were any, sadly. No, it's just fun to watch people bounce around on screen. Yeah, I don't even know how to lay them out exactly because there have been so many that we've hit. I mean, there is the constant thing that you and I have come back to both in the original series. I'm sorry, not both in the original series, in the animated series, and a few times already in Next Gen. Of being who you say you're going to be. And, I love the fact that the Edo, you just said, I mean, they gave Picard a way out, They're like, okay, so you're powerful. Yes. Okay, so here's what you're going to do. You're going to come in by force. You're going to take the guy. I'm going to write it down. There's nothing we could do. And we're going to move on. And Picard's like, yeah, but you see, I told some people that I was going to be this way. So I'm going to go ahead and be this way. And now it is interesting that at the very end, he did. I mean, he was like, okay, well, that's what I got to do, unfortunately. And now I will have to live with the consequences of that. Luckily, he was able to talk his way out of it for both his ship and his crew. But I mean, the fact that it might doesn't make right as far as Picard is concerned. There's a place for might. You might actually have to go. You might have to flex your muscles sometimes, but that's not step one. And it's also worth noting, although I guess Tasha and Worf did pull the phasers on the guys once they were trying to kill Wesley.
Right.
But they didn't immediately call up and say, "Oh, they got a death penalty here, so send down some shuttles and some more security dudes I guess they couldn't call either, so maybe they would have had they been able to. Maybe I'm going a little far there.
Well, no, but that could have been, from Picard's eyes, the long-term ramifications of doing something like that. Like, yeah, he could get Wesley out of there, and he understood that, and the Ito understood that. But then you destroy what could potentially be a longer relationship between the Federation and this other culture, even if it's just from the point of view of study and understanding. You absolutely destroy all of that because then you leave on this sour note where, well, here are these invaders and they messed things up and then they took off. We're never going to talk to them again.
Well, I guess it is worth noting too, though, there is the godlike thing up there that just by talking to them can shake their ship. So I mean, he's got a couple of good reasons for being as he says he wants to be. Partly because he said he wanted to, so he needs to try to be that guy. But then also because, well, something might swat his ship out of the sky if he doesn't actually do what he said he was going to do, or try to do it anyway.
Right. I thought it was funny that at the beginning of the episode, they run through the planet's customs and the pros and cons in about 2 minutes.
Yep.
And then they are just done. And it made me think, well, you really can't get to know someone, much less a whole planet, that fast. You need to maybe not judge this book by its cover and let your desires get ahead of you. Everybody was very gung-ho about going down there. Yeah. And a little more careful study would have benefited everybody. Jogging is good for you. I think we cannot come away from this episode without learning that lesson. And
honestly, it's never stated exactly, but being more open about sexuality. I mean, we've talked about this in a number of episodes in the past. Yeah. Being more open about sexuality. I mean, it's just, it wasn't really even a message. It's just sort of refreshing to see that, instead of saying things like, doing it.
Yeah, totally.
And instead of being, quiet about what your desires might be or, things like that, it's just like, hey, what's fun? Let me tell you. Right. Oh, wait, better still, let me show you. Obviously this is a science fiction setting that we're talking about, so it's definitely much more safe. The social norms are very different and all that stuff. But, starting off by being a bit more open about it would not necessarily be the worst thing. In fact, there are plenty of people who would argue, put your keyboard down. There are plenty of people who would argue that it would actually be a beneficial thing for any society that's still sort of got its hang-ups.
Sure. We have here Star Trek doing what Star Trek does very well and very often. We've got another Eden that isn't an Eden, though it's pretty close, depending on your point of view, and it's pretty close until we messed it up. There are the familiar Star Trek statements about blind faith. This time you had blind faith in the law, and that kind of made me remember the ambergris element, our old friends, the Aquans, with the ordainments from the animated series. They were so forthright and dedicated to their laws that they couldn't see the element, the benefit of bending that when they needed to. And then you also had the blind faith element with the god, the Ito god here. And Picard kind of pulls the rug out from under that too by exposing Riven to this thing in the sky. And that could have gone much more horribly until he beamed her down. But yeah, we have Star Trek here in this new series, and we're only, half dozen episodes in, painting a more detailed picture of the differences between the 20th century and the 24th century. If we learned that meat was murder an episode ago, here we learned that there's no death penalty, although we still question that whole idea of stamping out criminal behavior before it happens. Yeah, a little weird.
Well, he didn't say they stamp it out. We don't know what happens.
They do something. Yeah.
We've learned to identify that. Oh, well, good.
Yeah. And as far as what we do, we don't talk about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So much rich stuff here to talk about. And I would say that all of that holds up certainly to discussion and further study. So bravo.
I think what we should do actually is invite other people to join in the discussion. Don't you think?
I would love it if we did that.
Yeah. So I'll do that part. Okay. Facebook, Skype, and Twitter is where you can just hop right in. Handle in all three of those places, Mission Log Pod. You can, of course, call us, 323-522-5641. That number again, 323-522-5641. You can email us, missionlog@roddenberry.com. We have a website for our show. It is missionlogpodcast.com. We are also easy to find now at trekmovie.com. And we are now part of the Trek FM group of things. Do you call it a family? Do you call it a network? Do you call it a collective?
All of the above.
Yeah. Trek.fm is the place to find that. Remember, we may use your comments on an upcoming episode of Mission Log. And John, I know there is another place that you would like for people to check out online.
Yeah, for those of you who are just tuning in now, we are Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, in case there's any question about that. And we want to encourage people to go to roddenberry.com. Thank you, obviously, for checking out our website, but we are part of this whole big Roddenberry family. And one of the things that I particularly like at the roddenberry.com website is the shop, because they have cool stuff. They have cool Star Trek stuff, props and costumes and books and accessories for your car and just all kinds of rad Star Trek things that you and I need to own. So roddenberry.com when you have a moment.
It's so interesting to me that you call it the Roddenberry family, because I call it the collective.
Just as appropriate. Yep.
Yeah. So that is our, well, we didn't really fight. We didn't really contest each other on this one. That is our examination of this episode of Star Trek. But next week, oh yeah, the battle.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com, and from the album Messages, by Key Theory. Free to download at kitheory.com. My favorite line in this episode of Mission Log: Miles of Flesh and Wesley. I'm pretty sure they were a goth band. And transmission.